Story 1. The bus that has no number. The last bus of the night was supposed to come at 11:40. Ji-yeon had checked the schedule 3 times on her phone, standing alone at the stop on the edge of Mapo district. The street was quiet, not peaceful quiet, the kind of quiet that made you aware of how far you were from anyone else. She pulled her coat tighter and watched the road. A dog barked somewhere in the distance, then stopped. The street light above her flickered once and held. She told herself she was fine. She had taken this bus 100 times. Nothing had ever happened. By 11:52, she was still alone. She checked her phone again. No service. She turned in a slow circle, looking for a taxi, a convenience store, anyone at all. The road stretched out in both directions with nothing moving on it. The trees along the sidewalk were perfectly still. That was when she heard it. Not an engine sound, not the hiss of air brakes. Just a presence behind her, like something large and heavy had arrived without making any noise at all. She turned around. The bus was already there, sitting at the curb with its doors open. The interior lights were on, casting a pale yellow glow onto the pavement at her feet. She had not heard it approach. She had been watching the road. There had been nothing there 30 seconds ago. She looked up at the number board above the windshield. It was blank. The doors stayed open. The bus did not move. Something inside her told her not to get on. Something else, something tired and cold and practical, told her it was late and she had no other way home. She stepped forward. The interior was warmer than she expected. The overhead lights buzzed softly. The seats were the standard blue and gray, mostly empty. A man in a padded jacket sat near the front, his chin tucked to his chest, asleep. 2 teenage boys sat in the middle, both looking at their phones. A woman with a shopping bag balanced on her knees stared out the window at the passing dark. Normal. Everything looked completely normal. Ji-yeon exhaled and moved toward the back, out of habit. She preferred the back. She liked having the wall behind her. She was halfway down the aisle when she stopped. 3rd row from the back. Window seat. The girl sitting there had long, straight hair that fell past her shoulders. She was wearing the gray hoodie she always wore when it was cold. Her hands were folded in her lap, the way she always sat when she was tired. She was staring straight ahead, perfectly still. Ji-yeon's mouth went dry. It was So-yeon. It was So-yeon, exactly as she had been. Not older, not changed. Exactly as she was the last time Ji-yeon had seen her, which was at a funeral in March, in a coffin, 4 months ago. So-yeon had been killed by a drunk driver on a Wednesday evening while crossing the street near her apartment. The investigation had concluded in 2 weeks. The driver had received 4 years. Ji-yeon had not been able to eat properly for a month afterward. She stood in the aisle and stared. So-yeon did not look at her, did not move, did not acknowledge her at all. Just sat with her hands folded, staring forward, as if she were simply tired and waiting to arrive somewhere. Ji-yeon opened her mouth. She reached out. Her fingers were shaking. She stretched her hand toward So-yeon's shoulder, close enough to feel the fabric. The bus doors closed. The sound was loud in the silence. A heavy mechanical thud. Ji-yeon spun toward the front. The driver was visible only as a silhouette, shoulders squared, hands on the wheel, facing forward. He had not moved since she boarded. She had not seen his face. Outside the window, the stop sign she had been standing under was moving, pulling away. They were already driving. Ji-yeon looked back at So-yeon. So-yeon was still facing forward, but her head had tilted very slightly to the right, as if she were listening to something just below the range of hearing. Ji-yeon sat down in the seat across the aisle. She gripped the back of the seat in front of her and stared at the window. The streets outside were unfamiliar. She did not recognize any of the buildings, any of the signage. They were moving through a part of the city she had never seen. She looked at the other passengers. The sleeping man at the front. The boys with their phones. The woman with the shopping bag. None of them had moved. The boys were not scrolling. They were not laughing. They were completely still, eyes fixed on screens that were dark. Ji-yeon looked back at So-yeon. So-yeon had turned her head. She was looking directly at Ji-yeon now. Her face was calm. Her expression was the same as always, slightly tired, slightly gentle. The exact expression she had worn 1,000 times while they sat together in class or walked home from school. She opened her mouth to speak. The bus went dark. Story 2. The apartment above. Minji moved into Unit 402 in the middle of January, during the coldest week of the year. The apartment was small, but clean. The previous tenant had left in a hurry, the building manager told her. Left most of the furniture. She had assumed that meant a good deal in a furnished place. She had not asked why they left in a hurry. She had not thought to. The first night, she unpacked 2 boxes and ate ramen standing at the kitchen counter. The building was quiet. Old concrete construction, the kind that usually carried every sound from every floor. She could hear a television somewhere below her and the distant clank of pipes settling in the cold. She showered and got into bed just after midnight. The footsteps started at 12:17. She knew the time because she looked at her phone when she heard them. Slow, deliberate footsteps directly above her ceiling. The apartment above hers was Unit 502. She had passed its door in the hallway. There was a paper notice taped to it from the building management office. She had not read it closely. The steps moved from one end of the ceiling to the other, back and forth, unhurried, like someone pacing a room they knew very well. In the dark, without needing to see where they were going, she put her pillow over her head. The steps continued for 40 minutes. Then they stopped. She told herself it was new neighbors. She told herself she had simply not noticed the notice on the door. She told herself a lot of things that first night, lying in the dark, listening to the silence where the footsteps had been. By the third night, she had started counting 14 steps from one end of the ceiling to the other. She knew because her own apartment had the same layout. She had walked it herself, barefoot, heel to toe, counting carefully. 14 steps from the bedroom wall to the living room window. The footsteps above her covered exactly the same distance. Whoever was up there knew the apartment the way she knew hers. On the 4th night, she set her phone on the pillow beside her and opened the voice recorder before she went to sleep. She woke at 12:17 again. Exactly. The footsteps were already moving. She lay completely still and listened. They went back and forth 6 times. Then they stopped, directly above her bed. She held her breath. The ceiling was silent. Nothing moved. The refrigerator hummed in the kitchen. A car passed outside. Ordinary sounds, and yet the space above her head felt occupied in a way she could not explain. The way a room feels occupied when someone is standing in it, breathing, waiting. She did not sleep again that night. In the morning, she played back the recording. The footsteps were clear. 14 steps forward. Pause. 14 steps back. Over and over with the same rhythm, the same weight, the same unbroken patience. And at the end, just before the recording caught her own sharp intake of breath, there was something else. A sound she had not heard while she was awake. Very soft. Coming from directly above her pillow, like someone kneeling down. She went to the building manager the next morning before work. He was a small, quiet man who communicated mostly through folders and documents. She told him about the noise from 502. He did not look surprised. He did not look anything. He simply opened the filing cabinet behind his desk and pulled out a manila folder without being asked. Inside was a printed notice. Unit 502 had been vacant for 2 years. There had been a previous complaint from the tenant in 402 before Minji. The complaint was dated 14 months ago. It described the same thing. Footsteps at night. Always at 12:17. Always stopping above the bed. The building manager turned to the next page without prompting. There was a photograph. A woman, middle-aged, dark circles under her eyes. Photographed for what appeared to be a tenant registration file. The woman in the photo was wearing a loose knit sweater, dark green with small buttons at the collar. Minji looked at the photo for a long time. She was wearing the same sweater. She had found it in the closet when she moved in and assumed the previous tenant had left it behind. It was warm. It fit. She had not thought anything of it. The building manager said the woman in the photo had been the previous tenant of 402. She had filed the complaint and then stopped responding to building notices. When staff had gone to check on her, the apartment was empty. Personal belongings still in place. Door unlocked from the inside. She had not been seen since. Minji set the folder down on the desk. Above her, through the ceiling of the management office, she heard 14 slow steps begin. Story 3. The Well at the End of the Village. Junhee had been driving for 3 hours on a mountain road in Gangwon Province when he made a wrong turn somewhere near Inje. His GPS signal had dropped 20 minutes earlier, and he had been navigating by instinct, which in unfamiliar mountains at dusk was not a good strategy. He came around a bend and found a village. 12 houses arranged along a narrow lane, all of them dark. Not the darkness of people asleep or lights turned off for the evening. The darkness of buildings that had not been entered in a long time. Roofs still intact, walls still standing, but with that particular stillness that empty structures take on when they have been abandoned long enough. In the center of the lane was a stone well, and beside the well, sitting on a low wooden stool, was an old woman. She was watching him approach the way you watch something you have been expecting. No surprise on her face, no alarm. She sat with her hands folded over a walking stick and observed him with the calm of someone who had been sitting in that same spot for a very long time and was simply waiting for one more thing to happen before she could finally stop. Junhee rolled down his window. He asked if there was a road back to the main highway. The old woman looked at him for a moment before answering. She pointed up the lane, past the well, toward the tree line at the far end of the village. Then she said, without particular emphasis, as if it were a detail of no great consequence, "Do not drink from the well." He thanked her and kept driving. The lane ended at the tree line, exactly where she had indicated. A narrow dirt track continued into the forest, wide enough for one car. He followed it for 15 minutes, watching the light disappear between the pines, until the track curved and he came out of the trees. He was back at the well. Same 12 houses, same lane, same stone well in the center. The old woman was still sitting on her stool. She did not look up as his headlights swept across her. She was already looking at him. He sat in the car for a moment, then put it in reverse and went back the way he had come. He drove carefully, watching the track. He did not turn. He counted the minutes. At 15 minutes exactly, the track curved. He came out of the trees. The well was in front of him. The old woman looked at his car the way you look at something you have already seen arrive several times before and have simply grown accustomed to. There was no pity in her expression. There was no urgency. She sat with the patience of someone who understood that certain things took a long time to become clear to certain people. Junhee got out of the car. He walked toward the well and looked down into it. The stone rim was worn smooth by what must have been many years of hands resting on it. The rope was old, but intact. The darkness below was total. He could not see the bottom. He could not hear water. He looked at the old woman. She was already looking back at him. He found the notebook wedged between two stones at the base of the well. It was a standard composition notebook, the kind sold at any stationery shop. The cover was warped from moisture. He opened it carefully. The inside pages were filled with names, handwritten, in Korean, in different hands. Each name had a date beside it. Some of the dates were recent. Others went back 30, 40, 60 years. The ink had faded on the oldest ones, brown at the edges, barely legible. He flipped to the last page. His name was at the bottom. He stood very still and read it again. His full name, written in handwriting he recognized immediately because he had been looking at it his entire life. His own handwriting. The letters formed exactly the way he formed them, the slight leftward lean, the way he always wrote the final character with a small upward hook. He had not written it. The date beside his name was today's date. He looked up at the old woman. She had not moved from her stool. She was watching him with the same expression she had worn since he arrived. Not unkind, not frightened, simply patient, in the way that people are patient when the outcome of something has already been decided. He looked back at the notebook. Below his name, one line lower, was a line he had not seen when he first opened the page. It was blank. Waiting. He closed the notebook carefully and set it back between the stones. He got into his car. He gripped the wheel. He looked at the road leading out of the village, the same road he had already tried twice. He chose the left fork this time. He had not noticed a left fork before. Story 4. The number she left behind. Anna's younger sister, Yeon, died on a Wednesday morning in October, in a hospital bed on the 4th floor of a building in Sinchon. It was not unexpected. The illness had been progressing for 8 months. Hannah had been at her side. She had held her hand. She had stayed until there was nothing left to stay for. And then she had taken a taxi home and sat on her kitchen floor for a long time. On Thursday evening, Jan's phone called her. Hannah was in the middle of washing a cup when her own phone lit up on the counter. Jan's name on the screen. She recognized the contact photo she had taken herself. Her sister squinting against the sun outside a coffee shop last spring. She stood and watched it ring. She counted 11 rings before it stopped. She told herself someone had found the phone. The hospital staff, maybe, going through Jan's belongings. Someone had pressed the wrong contact. These things happened. She dried her hands and went back to the cup. On Friday at 8:14 p.m., it rang again. She picked up on the 4th ring. There was no voice at first, just the specific kind of silence that exists on an open phone line. The faint electronic presence that tells you someone is there, breathing, on the other end. Then Jan's voice, not distorted, not distant, clear and close, the way it always sounded when they talked at night. Both of them comfortable and unhurried. She said, "I'm so tired." Anna sat down on the floor. The calls continued. Every evening, between 8 and 9. Sometimes Jan would talk for several minutes. Sometimes she would say only a few sentences and then go quiet for a long time before the call ended. Anna stopped trying to explain it. She simply answered. Jan said the light was very bright where she was. Not warm, she said, just bright. She said people kept walking past her, but no one looked at her directly. She said it felt like standing in a very busy train station where everyone was going somewhere specific, and she had not yet been told her destination. Anna asked where she was. Jan was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "Somewhere you have already been. I don't think you remember it." She said she could still see things from there. Not clearly, like looking through water, she said. She could see Hannah's apartment. She could see the cup Hannah always kept on the second shelf from the top. She could see the coat Hannah had worn to the funeral, that Hannah had not put away yet, still hanging by the front door. Hannah looked at the coat hanging by the front door. On the 6th night, Jan's voice was slightly different, quieter, more careful. She said, "Someone here wants to know who you are." Hannah asked what she meant. There was a long silence. Then Jan said, "I told him you were my sister." I think that was the wrong thing to say. The call ended. Hannah sat with the phone in her hand for a very long time after that. On the 7th day, the call came at noon instead of the evening. Hannah was at work. She excused herself and went into the stairwell and answered with her back against the wall. Jan said, "Where are you right now?" Hannah said she was at work. In the stairwell on the 3rd, there was a pause that lasted almost a full minute. Then Jan said, very quietly, "That's strange." Hannah asked why. Jan said, "I'm looking at you right now, but you're in the kitchen. You're standing at the counter." Hannah's apartment was empty. She had left it locked at 8 that morning. She asked Jan to describe what she was seeing. Jan described the kitchen exactly. The yellow dish towel on the oven handle, the plant on the windowsill that Hannah kept meaning to water, the cup on the second shelf. Then she said, "Someone is standing behind you." In the stairwell, Hannah did not move. She said, "Behind me where I am now," or "behind the me you're seeing." Jan didn't answer immediately. Then she said, "I don't think they're the same person." The call dropped. Hannah stayed in the stairwell for 10 minutes before she went back to her desk. She called Jan's number twice that evening. Both times it went directly to a recording saying the number was no longer in service. The phone company had deactivated it 4 days after Jan's death. Hannah had been answering calls from a deactivated number for a week. That night she came home to find the kitchen light on. She had not left it on. The yellow dish towel was on the floor. The cup from the second shelf was sitting in the center of the counter. It was cracked down the middle, clean through, as if something had pressed it from both sides at once. Story 5. The child in the photograph. Silgi inherited a wooden box from her grandmother's apartment after the funeral. Inside were the things her family had decided were too personal to sell and too ambiguous to keep on display. Old letters, a jade ring, several photographs. The photographs were mostly family portraits from the 60s and 70s. She recognized her grandmother in some of them, young and straight-backed, unsmiling in the way people were in old photographs. At the bottom of the box was one she did not recognize. Black and white. A family of 8 standing in front of a traditional Korean house. The adults were dressed formally. The children stood in front of them except for one, a small child in the back row, standing slightly apart from the rest. Everyone in the photograph was looking at the camera, except for the child in the back row. The child was looking directly at Silgi. She understood that this was a photographic coincidence, that the child was simply looking slightly to the left of the camera and the effect was an illusion. She understood this clearly and set the photograph on her desk and did not think about it again, at least not until 2 days later, when she noticed something she had not seen the first time. The child in the back row had no shadow. Every other figure in the photograph cast a clear shadow across the ground behind them, consistent with the light source and the angle of the image. The child had none. The ground behind the child was lit exactly as if nothing were standing there. She put the photograph face down in the box and closed it. That night she dreamed about a house she had never been to. She woke at 3 a.m. The box was on her desk where she had left it. She lay in bed and looked at the ceiling and told herself she had simply been unsettled by an old photograph. She was a rational person. She worked in data analysis. She dealt in facts. She got up to get a glass of water. The photograph was on her pillow, face down, in the center of the pillow, placed precisely, as if someone had set it there carefully while she slept. She had not taken it out of the box. She had watched herself close the box and push it to the edge of the desk before she got into bed. She stood in the doorway of her bedroom for a long time. Then she walked to the pillow, picked up the photograph and turned it over. The family was still there. The house, the formal clothes, the shadows falling correctly across the ground. Everyone in the same position. The child in the back row was gone. Not blurred, not obscured, simply absent. The space where the child had stood was empty. The background behind it clearly visible. The ground unbroken. She checked every part of the image, every corner. The back row had 7 figures where there had been 8. The gap was visible, a space the width of a small child between 2 of the adults. She put the photograph back in the box. She put the box in the hallway outside her apartment door. She went back to bed and lay in the dark with the light on. In the morning, the box was on her desk again. She had not brought it back inside. She took the photograph to a shop that specialized in old image restoration. The technician examined it under a light and agreed to scan it at high resolution. He said he would call her when it was ready. He called the next morning. His voice was careful. He said she should come and look at the scans herself. She went that afternoon. He had printed 3 versions at different magnifications and laid them out on a white table. In the first scan, taken at standard resolution, The child was still absent from the back row. In the second scan, taken at higher magnification of the background, there was something in the tree line behind the house, a shape that was not a branch or shadow. The technician had circled it in red marker, a small figure, barely visible, standing at the edge of the trees, the proportions of a child. In the third scan, taken at maximum magnification and focused on the area just outside the frame of the image, on the very edge of the photographic paper, where old prints sometimes showed overexposed background detail, there was a handprint, small, pressed flat, as if a child had leaned against the photograph from the back and held their hand against it. The technician told her he had checked his equipment. He had checked the scanner glass. The handprint was not dust, and it was not a flaw in the paper. He could not explain it. Sugi took the photograph home and put it in a drawer she rarely opened. That evening she noticed the handprints on the inside of her bedroom window for the first time. Small, overlapping, pressed against the glass from inside. Her apartment was on the 9th floor. Story 6. The Friend at the River. Dong-woo had been on the trail for 3 hours when he saw her. They were somewhere in North Chuncheong province, he and his friend Sung-ho. 2 days into a 4-day hiking trip they had been planning since spring. The trail had been quiet all day. They had passed 2 other hikers in the morning, and no one since. The only sounds were their footsteps and the river below, invisible through the trees, but audible. A constant, low sound that had been following them since they left camp that morning. At a curve in the trail, the hillside opened up, and the river became visible far below, at the bottom of a steep, wooded bank. The water was low for the season. The rocks along the edges were exposed, and standing at the water's edge, on a flat rock in the middle of the narrow beach, was a woman in a white dress. Dong-woo stopped walking. She was completely still, arms at her sides, head slightly bowed, standing with the stillness of someone who had been there for a very long time and intended to remain. He put his hand on Sung-ho's arm. Sung-ho stopped and looked at him. Dong-woo pointed down at the river. Sung-ho looked. He said, "What?" Dong-woo looked at Sung-ho's face. He was looking directly at the spot where the woman stood. His eyes moved across the beach, across the rock, across the water. His expression showed nothing because there was nothing to show. He could not see her. Dong-woo looked back at the river. She was still there, still not moving, but her head had lifted. She was looking up at them. He said nothing to Sung-ho. They set up camp at dusk in a flat clearing 30 meters from the trail. Sung-ho cooked dinner on the small gas stove, while Dong-woo sat at the edge of the clearing and watched the tree line. The forest was dark beyond the reach of the camp light. The river was still audible, further away now, a lower sound. Nothing moved in the trees. They ate and talked about ordinary things. Sung-ho was having problems at work. Dong-woo listened and said the right things. He was not thinking about work. At midnight he woke up. He did not know what had woken him. There was no sound. The tent was dark. Sung-ho was breathing slowly beside him. Dong-woo unzipped the tent and looked out. She was standing at the tree line. Same white dress, same stillness. 20 meters from the tent, at the exact edge where the clearing ended and the trees began. She was facing the camp directly. He could not make out her face at that distance in the dark, only the white of the dress, luminous and still against the black pines. He watched her for a long time. She did not move. He zipped the tent closed and lay back down. He did not sleep. He counted his own heartbeats until the sounds of the forest shifted into the particular quality of early morning, that slight change in texture that happens just before dawn. When the light came up, he unzipped the tent again. The tree line was empty. He stood in the clearing and looked at the spot where she had been. The ground was soft from recent rain. He walked to the edge and looked down at the earth. There were no footprints. In the morning, he told Sung-ho he wanted to leave early. Sung-ho didn't argue. He was used to Dong-woo making decisions without explaining them fully. They broke camp in 40 minutes, packed efficiently, and started back up the trail toward the trailhead. Dong-Woo walked behind Sung-Ho. He kept his eyes forward. He did not look back. At the curve where the trail opened up over the river, he stopped. He looked down at the beach. The flat rock where the woman had been standing the previous afternoon was empty. The beach was empty. The river moved slowly between the exposed stones, ordinary and unremarkable. He exhaled and kept walking. At the trailhead, they reached the car. Sung-Ho loaded the packs into the trunk. Dong-Woo put his hand on the door handle and paused. He looked back one last time. A reflex, something he always did at the end of a hike. A last look at the trail, a way of marking the transition. She was standing at the spot where their tent had been, 30 meters up the hill in the empty clearing. White dress, same stillness. She had been there all morning, he realized. While they broke camp and packed and walked away, she had been standing 10 meters from where they slept. She raised one arm, not waving, not beckoning. She pointed at him, directly, deliberately. The way you point at something you want someone else to look at, or the way you point at someone you have decided to follow. He got in the car. He did not tell Sung-Ho what he had seen. He has not been back to that province since. He still checks the tree line when he wakes up at night. Story 7. She was never on the CCTV. Yuna had been working the night shift at the same convenience store in Mapo for 8 months. Midnight to 8. She had the routine down precisely. Stock the refrigerators at 1 a.m. Mop the floor at 3. Prep the coffee station at 5. Count the till at 7:30. The store was quiet after 2. The occasional drunk, the occasional delivery driver, the occasional person who needed ramen and did not want to explain why they were awake. On a Tuesday in November, she was restocking the cold drinks at the back when she heard the door sensor chime. She looked up. A woman had entered the store. Long black coat, hair pulled back. She moved quietly. The kind of quiet that you only notice because ordinary people make more sound than they realize. No rustle of a bag, no squeaking shoes on the linoleum. She walked to the back of the store and stopped in front of the refrigerator section on the far wall. Yuna watched her for a moment, then went back to restocking. When she looked up again 5 minutes later, the woman was still in the same position, standing in front of the refrigerator, not opening it, not looking at the labels on the doors, just standing. Yuna waited. At the 15-minute mark, she set down the crate she was holding and walked to the back. The aisle was empty. The refrigerator doors were closed. The aisle was silent. The woman was gone. Yuna checked the other aisles quickly. The bathroom in the back, the stock room, nothing. She went to the counter and pulled up the CCTV feed. The monitors showed the interior of the store in 4 split-screen views. She rewound to 3:12 when the door sensor had chimed. The door opened. She watched herself look up from the refrigerator section. On the screen, she was alone. The door had opened and closed on its own. She watched the timestamp move forward. At 3:13, she watched herself continue restocking. At 3:15, she watched herself look up toward the back wall. On the screen, the back wall was empty. The refrigerator aisle was empty. She rewound to the moment the door had opened and watched it 3 more times. The door opened. She looked up. There was nothing there. She switched to the exterior camera. At 3:12, the street outside was empty. No one approaching the door. No one leaving. The pavement was wet from earlier rain. She could see the reflections of the streetlights in the puddles. No shadow, no movement. She rewound further. She went back to 11 p.m. and watched the footage forward at double speed. In 8 hours of footage, she had been the only person in the store, but she had heard the door sensor. She had seen the woman walk in. She had watched her stand in the refrigerator aisle. She had looked at it for several seconds from a distance of 4 meters. She was not misremembering. She was not tired enough to hallucinate. She had worked this shift for 8 months, and she knew the difference. She called the police at 4 a.m. They arrived at 4:22. 2 officers who had clearly been hoping for a quiet night. She showed them the footage. They watched the door open. They watched the empty store. One of them asked if she was feeling all right. The officers left at 5:10. They told her to call if anything else happened. They did not say this with any particular conviction. Una locked the bathroom door and splashed water on her face and looked at herself in the mirror for a while. She was fine. She was perfectly fine. She had simply seen something the camera had not captured, which was impossible. Which meant she had not seen it, which was also impossible, because she had. She went back to the counter. At 5:30, she looked at the CCTV monitor out of habit, the automatic check she did every half hour throughout the shift. The store looked normal. The aisles were clear. The lighting was even. The refrigerators at the back stood in a row, their contents visible through the glass doors. Everything in its correct position. And standing directly behind Una, in the space between the counter and the shelving unit, was the woman in the black coat on the screen, not visible from where Una was sitting. The camera angle showed the area behind the counter that Una could not see without turning around. The woman was standing there, 1 meter from Una's back, facing the same direction, looking at the screen along with her. Una did not turn around. She watched the monitor. The woman on the screen did not move. She stood with the same perfect stillness she had shown in the refrigerator aisle. She was close enough on the screen that Una could see her face. She had seen that face before. It was the face of the woman who had worked the night shift before Una, the one who had stopped coming in 6 months ago without notice or explanation, the one no one at the store had been able to reach since. Story 8. The mirror in room 7. Yojin had been to Gyeongju twice before, both times for work, both times staying in business hotels near the station. This time she was alone, no agenda, 4 days off from a job she was considering quitting. She found the guest house through a recommendation in an online forum. Old building, traditional layout, affordable. Reviews said quiet. She arrived in the early evening. The owner, an older man with careful eyes, showed her to room 7 at the end of the hall. The room was small and clean. Andol floor, low table, a window that looked out on a narrow garden that was mostly bare in the winter. The mirror was on the wall directly facing the bed. Hyojin had always disliked sleeping with a mirror facing the bed. She did not have a specific reason for this. She simply did not like it. She crossed the room and turned the mirror to face the wall before unpacking. The owner, who had waited in the doorway for a moment, said nothing. She went out for dinner and came back at 10:30. She washed her face and got into bed and read for 20 minutes and turned off the light. She woke at 2:17 a.m. The room was dark. She lay still and let her eyes adjust. The shape of the room became visible. The low table, the window with the garden beyond it, the wall with the mirror. The mirror was facing the bed. She sat up and looked at it for a long time. The room reflected in the glass was dark and still, her own shape visible sitting upright. The bed, the table, the walls. She got up and checked the door. Locked from the inside. The window was latched. She turned the mirror back to face the wall and got back into bed. At 3:40 a.m., she woke again. She knew before she opened her eyes. The particular quality of the darkness in the room had changed. There was something different in the weight of the air, the way there is when a space that was empty is no longer empty. She opened her eyes. The mirror was facing the bed again. She lay still and looked at her reflection, her own shape lying on her side, covers pulled up. The low table, the back wall, the window. At the foot of the bed, in the reflection, something was sitting. She looked at the foot of the bed directly. Nothing was there. The blanket lay flat and undisturbed. The floor at the foot of the bed was empty. In the mirror, something sat at the foot of the bed and looked at her. She could not make out its features, only the shape, the approximate shape of a person sitting upright, slightly too still, facing her. She reached for her phone on the bedside table without looking away from the mirror. She turned on the camera and held it up and filmed the reflection. On the screen of her phone, in the recording, the shape was visible. She pressed herself against the headboard and watched the mirror and the phone screen both. In the mirror, the shape did not move. In the phone screen, the same. Both showing the same thing. The shape at the foot of her bed, and the reflection only, sitting and watching. She watched it until dawn. At first light, it was gone. She packed her bag, left an envelope with the room payment on the low table, and left without speaking to the owner. She was halfway to the station when she stopped. She had left without asking. That was what she had told herself all night she would not do. She had made it through the night in that room, and she was going to leave without asking, because asking would make it real in a different way than it was already real. But she stopped at a coffee shop near the station and sat down and took out her phone and watched the recording she had taken at 3:40 a.m. The shape was there, clear enough in the low light, sitting at the foot of the bed, facing the camera, in the mirror. She watched it 3 times. It did not move in the recording. It simply sat and was present in a way that should not have been possible. She went back to the guest house. The owner was at the front desk. He looked up when she came in, but did not seem surprised. She told him she had stayed in room 7. She asked about the mirror. He looked at the room key she had left on the desk. He said, "We don't have a room 7. She looked at the key. The number 7 was on the tag. He turned the keyboard around on the wall behind him. 2 rows of hooks, each hook numbered. The numbers went 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and then 8. The hook between 6 and 8 was there. It was empty. It had no number. She looked at the owner. He looked at the key in her hand. He said quietly, the way you say something you have said before you can keep that if you want. It always comes back anyway. Story 9. The hiking trail that loops. 4 of them had gone up Bukhansan on a Sunday in October. Jihoon, Soyeon, Minjae, and Cheon. They had done this trail twice before without incident. 3 hours up, 2 down. Stopped for Dak Galbi on the way back. A routine they had settled into over 3 years of friendship. The weather was clear. The trail was well marked. They passed other hikers in the first hour. Families with young children, older couples with trekking poles. By the second hour, the trail had thinned out, and they had it mostly to themselves. At the 2-hour mark, they reached a fork. Jihoon stopped. He looked at the 2 paths, then looked back down the trail they had come from. He said he did not remember passing a fork. The other 3 stopped and looked at it. So-yeon had the trail map on her phone. She checked it. The trail they were on did not show a fork at this point. Both paths ahead were unmarked on the map. They stood there for a few minutes discussing it. Minjae thought they might have taken a wrong turn somewhere without noticing. Cheon thought the map might simply be outdated. Jihoon thought they should try the left path and see where it led. If it seemed wrong, they could come back. They went left. The path was clear and well worn, the kind of path that gets that way from regular use. They walked for another hour through autumn trees. The light was good. The air was cold and clean. Nothing seemed wrong. Then they came around a bend. The fork was in front of them. Same 2 paths, same configuration. A broken branch on the ground to the right of the split, exactly where it had been before. So-yeon crouched down and looked at the broken branch. She had noticed it the first time because it was an unusual break, clean through, at a height that suggested it had not broken naturally. She had looked at it for a moment and then walked on. She had not touched it. The branch was in a slightly different position. Not moved far, 6, maybe 8 centimeters from where it had been. Rotated slightly, but different. She was certain it was different. She told the others. Minjae said she was misremembering. People misremember small details all the time, especially on trails where everything looks similar. She had simply noticed the branch, and her memory of where exactly it had been was imprecise. So-yeon said she did not think that was what had happened. They tried the right path this time. Same conditions. Well-worn trail. Autumn trees. Cold air. They walked for 50 minutes without speaking much. The mood had shifted. Cheon kept checking her phone for a signal. Ji-hoon walked at the front and set a faster pace. They came around a bend. The fork. The broken branch. Different position again. They stopped walking and stood in silence. The forest was very quiet around them. No bird sounds, which Ji-hoon noticed because there had been birds earlier. Small sounds in the undergrowth, calls from the upper branches. Now there was nothing. No wind either. The trees stood perfectly still. Min-jae said, "I think we need to stop moving." They stopped. They stood at the fork and listened. The silence continued for a full minute. Then two. Then Jae-yeon said, very quietly, "Something is watching us." No one argued with her. The feeling had been building since the second time they found the fork. The sense of being observed from multiple directions at once. From the trees, from above, from somewhere behind them on the trail. Ji-hoon had felt it and not said anything. He suspected the others had too. He looked up. On the ridge above the tree line, standing on a flat shelf of rock that overlooked the fork, was a figure in white, too far away to make out features. The proportions were human, roughly, but the stillness was not. It stood with a quality of absence that made it difficult to look at directly. Ji-hoon's eyes kept sliding off it, wanting to settle somewhere more ordinary. He pointed. The others looked. None of them spoke. The figure raised its arm, slowly, the way you move when you want to make sure the movement is seen. It extended one arm and pointed at the fork. The left path. Min-jae said we should go. They went left. They ran. Not in a panic, not screaming. The focused, efficient running of people who have agreed, without words, that the situation requires speed and that asking questions about it can happen later. They ran and did not look back and did not look up at the ridge. They reached the trailhead at 4:47 p.m. Their cars were the only ones left in the parking lot. Ji-hoon pulled up the trail map on his phone and showed it to the others. The section of trail they had walked during the loop. The fork that appeared twice. Neither path existed on the map. The map showed a single, unbroken trail from the trailhead to the summit. No fork, no split. So-yeon looked at the trail behind them. She said something brought us out. No one disagreed. Story 10. The locked room on the 4th floor. Chaewon's grandmother had lived in the same apartment in Incheon for 31 years. It was a 4th floor unit in a building that had been modern once and had settled into a comfortable shabbiness over the decades. Her grandmother had filled it with plants and photographs and the specific clutter of someone who had kept everything because you never knew. She died in February. Chaewon drove up from Seoul to help clear the apartment. There were 4 rooms. Living room, kitchen, 2 small bedrooms. One of the bedroom doors had a padlock on it. Not an old padlock. Relatively new. The kind you could buy at any hardware store. She asked her mother about it. Her mother said grandmother had put it on about 3 years ago. She had told the family that the room was being used for storage and was a mess, and she didn't want anyone going in. No one had questioned it. People were entitled to their private spaces. Chaewon found the key in the kitchen drawer, tucked under a folded dish towel. It was small and brass and warm to the touch in a way that seemed strange, given that the apartment had been empty and unheated for 2 weeks since the death. She held it for a long time. Then she crossed the hall to the locked room and opened it. The room was empty. Bare walls, plain floor, a single wooden chair in the exact center of the room, facing the wall. No storage, no clutter, nothing to suggest why the room would need to be locked. She looked at the chair for a moment and then looked at the wall it was facing. The names covered the entire wall, written in pencil, in small, careful handwriting. Dozens of names arranged in columns, each one with a date beside it. The dates spanned decades. Some of the names had additional notes beside them, abbreviated. She couldn't read all of them clearly. A few had been circled. She walked closer. The names were all female. She scanned down the list slowly. The format was consistent. Name, date, and occasionally a word or two she could not fully decipher. Near the top of the list, she found her grandmother's name, a date from 1973 beside it. Her grandmother would have been 32, 4 lines below her mother's name, a date from 1989. She stepped closer to the wall and began reading more carefully from the bottom of the list, working upward. The dates grew more recent the lower she went. She reached the bottom of the list and read the last 3 names. The third from the bottom was someone she did not know. The second from the bottom was someone she did not know. The last name on the list was hers. Her full name, written in the same careful pencil as all the others. The date beside it was 3 days from now. She stood in front of the wall and looked at her name for a long time. Then she backed out of the room, pulling the door closed, pressing the padlock shut. She needed to lock it. She needed it locked. She looked down at her hand. The key was gone. She had not put it down. She had been holding it throughout. Her hand was empty. The key was not on the floor. It was not in her pocket. She searched the entire apartment for an hour. She never found it. She called her mother from the parking lot. She did not tell her about the list. She asked about the room instead. She asked whether her grandmother had ever mentioned why she locked it, whether she had ever said anything about it at all. Her mother was quiet for a moment. Then she said actually she did say something. Once, a few years ago. She said the room was for keeping track. Chewan asked what that meant. Her mother said she didn't know. She had assumed her grandmother was getting confused, the way older people sometimes do. She had not pressed it. Chewan sat in the car and thought about the wall, the names in columns, the dates, her grandmother's name near the top, her mother's in the middle, her own at the bottom. A line descending through generations. She thought about who had written them. Her grandmother had locked the room, but the list covered the entire wall. There were names on that list from decades before her grandmother was born. Someone had been adding to it for a very long time. She drove back to Seoul that evening. She did not sleep well. She kept thinking about the chair, placed precisely in the center of the room, facing the wall where the names were written, not facing the door, facing the names, as if someone sat there and read them regularly. The way you sit to look at something important, something you are responsible for keeping track of. She arrived back in Seoul just after midnight. When she unlocked her apartment and stepped inside, the brass key was on the kitchen counter. She had never been to this apartment before. She had moved in 6 weeks ago. She had not given anyone a key. She picked it up. It was warm. Story 11. The sound from the drain. Jin-Soo moved into the apartment in September. 3rd floor, north-facing. The kind of apartment that never got enough sunlight but stayed cool in summer. He had rented it sight unseen from a listing online and had been moderately pleased to find that the photographs had been accurate. Small but functional. He had lived in smaller. He unpacked his things over 2 days. On the first night, he slept on the floor with a sleeping bag because his bed frame had not arrived yet. He was tired, and he slept deeply, and he did not hear anything. On the second night, with the bed assembled and his kitchen arranged and most of the boxes emptied, he heard it. He was almost asleep when it started, a sound from the bathroom. He was not entirely sure at first that it was a sound. It was closer to the idea of a sound, something at the low edge of perception that you might convince yourself was the building settling or the pipes adjusting to the season. But it was rhythmic. He lay in the dark and listened. In, out. In, out. Like breathing, but slower than breathing. The rhythm of something very large or something very deliberate, moving air in and out at a pace that matched no living creature he could think of. It was coming from the bathroom drain. He got up and stood in the bathroom doorway. He turned on the light. The room was small and white and entirely ordinary. The drain was in the center of the floor, a standard chrome grate. He looked at it for a while. The sound had stopped when he turned on the light. He told himself it was the pipes. He started closing the bathroom door before bed. It helped for a while. The sound was muffled enough that he could ignore it if he was tired. He kept the fan running in the bedroom as white noise. He had a particular kind of practical approach to unexplained things that had served him reasonably well throughout his life, which was to assume a sensible explanation existed and wait for it to present itself. In the second week, he woke at 4 a.m. to find the bathroom door open. He always closed it. He closed it every night. It was a habit as automatic as turning off the kitchen light. He lay in bed and looked at the open door and the dark bathroom beyond it and listened. The sound was louder than it had been. In, out. In, out. Filling the bathroom, spilling into the hallway. Closer to breathing now. He could not avoid the word. It was breathing from the drain. He got up. He poured an entire bottle of bleach down the drain. He ran hot water after it. He stood over the drain and watched the bleach disappear into the darkness below. The sound stopped. He kept the fan running. He slept with the bathroom door open after that, reasoning that he would rather know if the door moved than wake up to find it already open. For 2 days, there was nothing. On the third night, the sound returned, louder than it had been before the bleach, as if the bleach had not cleaned something out but had disturbed it, made it aware of him in a new way. He lay in bed and listened to the breathing from the drain. And then it said his name. He sat up. The sound had been formless until that moment. Abstract, possible to categorize as mechanical or environmental with the right amount of effort. But a name was not abstract. A name was specific. His name spoken with a particular inflection, a particular weight on the first syllable and a slight softness on the second. The exact pattern of pronunciation that only one person had ever used. His mother. She had called him Jinsu, the way no one else did, with the specific warmth of someone who had said a name 10,000 times before it became a name, and was simply a sound that meant, here, come here, I see you. She had been dead for 11 years. A stroke on a Tuesday morning in April, when he was 24 and living in a different city, and got the call in the middle of a meeting and excused himself to go and sit in a stairwell alone. He sat in his bed and listened to the drain say his name. It said it 3 times, the same voice, the same inflection, unhurried, clear, without distortion or echo, as if she were in the bathroom with him, standing at the door, calling him the way she had called him when dinner was ready, or when she wanted to tell him something and he was in another room. He did not move. He sat in bed until the voice stopped, and then until the breathing stopped, and then until the silence settled into something ordinary, and then until daylight. He moved out at the end of the month. The new tenant moved in 6 weeks later. He does not know what they heard, if anything. He has not called a plumber. There is nothing a plumber could fix. He still sleeps with the fan running. Story 12. The woman who waits at 3 a.m. Unji worked late every night that December. There was a project deadline that kept moving and a team that kept shrinking, and she was the one left to keep the thing from collapsing. She took the last subway home at 11:30 most nights, sometimes midnight, occasionally later. The subway was empty by that point. 1 or 2 other passengers in each car, usually asleep, occasionally on phones. The journey was 30 minutes. She sat in the third car from the front out of habit, in the seat closest to the door she needed. The woman was in the last car. She noticed her for the first time on a Wednesday in early December. Into the car, center seat. White coat, long, the kind that came to the knees. Dark hair, long, falling forward over her face. She sat with her hands in her lap and her head slightly bowed. She did not look at her phone. She did not move. Unji noticed her and then looked away and then looked back. The woman was still in the same position. Not sleep. The stillness was too deliberate for sleep. At the station before hers, Unji got off to switch platforms. She had to pass the last car on her way to the exit. She slowed as she passed the window. The woman was still sitting, head still bowed, hands still folded. As Unji passed, the woman's head lifted. She turned. For a fraction of a second, through the train window, their eyes met. The train doors closed. The train moved. Unji stood on the platform and told herself the woman had simply heard her footsteps and looked up. A normal response. What anyone would do. She took the stairs, 2 at a time. She stopped sitting in the third car. She moved to the front, the first car, as far from the end of the train as she could get. She arrived at the platform early to confirm she was getting on the right car. On the third night, she checked. She walked the length of the train during the 2-minute wait at one of the middle stations. She looked through the window between cars as she passed each one. In the last car, the woman was in the same seat, same coat, same position, same bowed head. Unji went back to the front car. She sat down and faced forward and breathed carefully. The train moved. She did not look back. At the penultimate station, she looked through the window between cars out of a compulsion she could not quite control. The woman was in the car directly behind hers. She had moved several cars forward without Unji seeing it happen. She was sitting in the seat closest to the window between the cars. Her head was lifted now. She was facing forward, looking through the window, looking directly at Unji through the connecting glass. The train pulled into the next station. Unji got off 2 stops early. She did not look back as she walked toward the exit. She moved quickly, following the signs, taking the stairs, emerging onto the street. She found a taxi within a minute, got in, gave her address. The driver did not speak the whole way, which she appreciated. At her building, she paid and got out. She heard the taxi pull away behind her. She was searching for her keys when she heard it, the creak of a car seat, from the empty street where the taxi had been. She found her keys and went inside and locked the door. She stood in the entrance of her apartment and breathed. She was fine. She had let something ordinary grow into something frightening through repetition and late nights and exhaustion. The woman on the subway was a commuter, a person going home from work like Unji was. The coincidence of seeing her in the same spot several nights in a row simply meant they had similar schedules. The eyes meeting through the window was an accident. The moved car was something she had miscounted. She was fine. She changed her clothes and made tea and sat at the kitchen table. At 1:47 a.m., her phone showed a missed call. The number was not in her contacts. It was a mobile number she did not recognize. She had not heard her phone ring. She called the number back. It rang 4 times. Then someone picked up. No voice. The specific silence of an open line. She waited. She said hello twice. Nothing. Then from somewhere on the other end, very faint, the sound of a subway announcement. A station name. Her station. The one she had gotten off at before tonight. The stop before her usual one. The announcement she would have heard at 11:47 p.m. if she had ridden the train to that stop. The call ended. She put the phone down on the table. From the hallway outside her apartment door came a single sound. The click of a shoe on the tile floor. 1 step, then nothing. She sat at the kitchen table until morning with all the lights on. She requested remote work for the rest of the month. She did not explain why. She has never ridden that subway line at night again. Story 13. The Photograph That Moved. Soman bought the book at a weekend market near Hongdae on a Saturday in March. A collection of Korean folk poetry, older edition. The kind of book that moved through secondhand shops and market stalls for decades before finding someone who wanted it. She bought it for 2,000 won because she liked the cover design. She found the photograph tucked between pages 42 and 43. It was a standard photograph print, the kind made from film, slightly faded at the edges. A woman standing alone on a mountain trail. Mid-40s perhaps, dressed for hiking, practical clothes. She was smiling. Not posed, not formal. The smile of someone who had been walking for a while and was genuinely enjoying it. The background behind her was a mountain forest. Dense, the trees blurred by depth of field, the light coming through in long strips. Nothing unusual about it. Nothing unusual about any of it. Soman set the photograph on her bookshelf and forgot about it. She read the book over the next 2 weeks. She thought of the photograph occasionally, the way you think of minor curiosities. Someone had loved that book enough to carry a photograph in it. She hoped whoever it was had simply forgotten it rather than lost it under more difficult circumstances. In the 3rd week of March, she was tidying the shelf when she picked up the photograph again. She looked at it. Then she looked at it more carefully. Then she carried it to the window and held it in better light. In the background, between 2 trees, there was a figure. She was almost certain it had not been there before. She studied it for a long time. The figure was at the edge of visibility, partially obscured by the blurred tree trunks, caught at an angle that made it difficult to resolve into anything specific. It could have been a hiker in the background, someone walking through the same section of trail that the photograph didn't show clearly because of depth of field. It could have been a shadow taking on a vaguely human shape, which happened in photographs all the time. It could have been there from the start, and she simply hadn't noticed it. She put the photograph back on the shelf. 2 days later, she took it to a photography shop in Sinchon that still offered film development and high-resolution scanning. She asked them to scan the original at maximum resolution. The technician was a young man who seemed genuinely interested in old photographs, and he handled it carefully. He called the next morning. He said, "You should come look at this." She went that afternoon. He had made several prints at increasing magnification and laid them out on the counter. In the standard resolution scan, the figure was visible but still ambiguous. In the second print, at higher magnification focused on the background, the figure was clearer. It was not a hiker. The posture was wrong. The angle of the limbs didn't match normal standing posture. In the third print, the highest magnification, focused on the background directly behind the woman. The figure was directly behind her. Not in the tree line, behind her. Close enough to touch her. The technician said I'd check the scanner. The scanner is fine. Whatever's in this photograph was in the original negative. He printed a fourth copy and pushed it across the counter. He said, "Look at the woman's shadow." She looked. The woman's shadow fell in front of her, consistent with the light source. The figure behind her had no shadow at all. She went back to the market the following Saturday. The stall was still there. The same arrangement of books and maps and miscellaneous objects spread across a folding table. She described the book to the man behind the table, an older man, heavy-set, with the careful stillness of someone who had been standing in the same spot every weekend for many years. When she described the cover, his expression changed. She showed him the photograph. He looked at it for a long time without speaking. Then he looked up at her. He said, "Where did you get this?" She explained. The book, the market, the photograph tucked between pages. She had assumed it belonged to the previous owner. He said, "That book belonged to my daughter. I sold it months ago. I didn't check it first. I should have checked it first." He looked at the photograph again. His daughter had disappeared on a hiking trail 3 years ago. They had found her pack, her walking poles, her water bottle. They had not found her. The investigation had concluded without resolution. The trail where she disappeared was in the mountains of North Chungcheong province. He pointed at the background of the photograph. He said, "That trail, that is where she was last seen." He pointed at the figure behind his daughter. He said, "We showed this photograph to the investigators at the time. They looked at this image for hours. They said they could not identify who that was." He looked at Soman. He said she was hiking alone. There was no one with her. We confirmed it. No one had signed into the trail after her that morning. He folded his hands on the table. He said quietly, "I don't know what is in that photograph, but I stopped looking at it. I would suggest you do the same." Story 14. The elevator that goes down. Minho worked on the 10th floor of an office building in Yoido, one of the towers near the river that all looked identical and were full of financial companies and their support infrastructure. He had worked there for 4 years, and he knew the building the way you know a place you have spent more waking hours in than your own home. The lobby, the security desk, the 2 elevator banks, the coffee machine on 7 that was slightly better than the one on 10. The building had 12 floors above ground and 2 basement levels. B1 was parking. B2 was mechanical, the building's systems, not accessible to regular staff. On a Tuesday in late November, he got into elevator B, alone, at 7:43 p.m. He had stayed late. The cleaning crew had already been through his floor. He pressed L for lobby. The doors closed. The elevator descended. He watched the floor indicator above the doors. 10, 9, 8. The numbers decreasing normally. Then 6, 5, 4. Normal speed. He had his coat over his arm and his phone in his hand, and he was not thinking about anything in particular. 3, 2, 1. Then L. The elevator kept going. He looked at the panel. He had pressed L. The L button was lit. He pressed it again. He pressed 1. He pressed 3. He pressed the door open button. The elevator continued descending, unhurried, the same smooth mechanical motion. B1 passed. B2 passed. The elevator continued descending through floors that did not exist on any map of the building he had ever seen. It stopped. The indicator read B6. The building had 2 basement levels. He was looking at a floor indicator that showed 6. The doors opened. A concrete corridor stretched ahead of him, wide enough for 2 people to pass each other, but not comfortably. The ceiling was low. Yellow utility lights ran along the center of the ceiling at intervals, casting a flat, even illumination that threw no shadows. The floor was bare concrete, slightly wet, the moisture catching the light in a long, continuous gleam. The corridor smelled of old water and something underneath it that he couldn't identify. The air that came through the open elevator doors was cooler than the elevator itself, significantly cooler. He stood at the threshold and did not step out. At the far end of the corridor, at the limit of the yellow light where the corridor bent or ended, there was a figure. He could not see it clearly. The distance was too great and the light was too flat. But something was there, at the far end, in the space between the last light and the darkness beyond. It was oriented toward him. While he watched, it began to move, not running, walking. The measured, unhurried walk of someone who has time and knows it. He hit every button on the elevator panel, every floor, every function. He hit them in sequence and then at random. And then he held the door close button with both thumbs and watched the corridor. The doors closed. He did not look away from the seam of the closing doors until they met completely. The elevator went up. The lobby was normal. The security guard at his desk looked up when the elevator opened. He nodded at Minho the way he always did at the end of the night. Nothing unusual. Minho walked to the desk. He asked the guard about the basement levels. How many were there? The guard said 2. B1 and B2. Minho asked if there was any other access below B2. Maintenance tunnels, old infrastructure, anything. The guard said, not in this building. It's all documented. Why? Minho said he had just gotten confused about which button he pressed. He thanked the guard and walked to the lobby exit. At the door he stopped. He looked down at his shoes. They were wet, both of them. He had not walked through anything. He had gone from his office to the elevator, from the elevator to the lobby. There was nothing to walk through. He lifted one foot and looked at the sole. Damp. He thought about the floor in the corridor. The concrete, slightly wet. The moisture gleaming under the yellow lights. He put his foot down. He reached into his coat pocket for his phone, where he had been holding it when the elevator descended. His hand touched something else first. He pulled it out. A small piece of concrete, gray, irregular. The kind of fragment that breaks off a wall or floor, damp. He put it down on the lobby floor. He left the building. He requested a desk transfer the next day. He now works on the 3rd floor. He takes the stairs. He has not been in that elevator since. Story 15. The Neighbor Who Smiled. Nara had moved into the new apartment on a Monday. It was a standard unit in a mid-rise building in Nowan, the kind of apartment that was adequate in every way without being remarkable in any. She was starting over after several years of things not going particularly well. and adequate and unremarkable suited her fine. She had been there 3 days when the neighbor introduced herself. She was crossing the hallway with a bag of recycling when the door directly across from hers opened. The woman who stepped out was middle-aged, neat appearance. She moved with the contained, careful ease of someone who had lived in the same place for a long time and felt entirely comfortable in it. She smiled when she saw Nara. It was a wide smile, the kind of smile that took up a significant portion of the face. Nara noticed it, and then felt slightly strange about noticing it, because noticing a smile was an unusual thing to register. But there was something about the way the smile sat on the woman's face that her attention returned to involuntarily. The woman said she had lived there for many years. She said Nara would love it. She said everyone always did. She paused slightly on the word always. She said at first. Then she went back inside. Nara stood in the hallway with her recycling bag and thought about the pause before at first. Then she told herself she was reading too much into a greeting from an ordinary neighbor and took her recycling downstairs. That evening she passed the door across the hall on her way in. The light was on inside, visible through the gap at the bottom. Over the following week she noticed the pattern. Any hour she left or returned to her apartment, the woman was in the hallway, not always doing something, sometimes simply standing by her own door, hands at her sides, facing the corridor. Sometimes she had a bag or a key in her hand as if she had just arrived or was about to leave. She always smiled when she saw Nara, the same wide smile. Nara started using the stairs instead of the elevator to avoid the hallway. The stairwell at the end of the corridor was slightly out of her way, but she preferred it. She could move through it quickly. On the 5th day, she was in the stairwell between her floor and the one below when she encountered an older woman coming up. They nodded at each other, the instinctive acknowledgement of building residents. Nara mentioned the neighbor. She asked if she had lived there long, as a way of making conversation. The older woman stopped on the step. She asked which apartment. Nara said across the hall from 7. A woman who's always in the corridor. The older woman looked at her carefully. She said that apartment has been empty for 2 years, since the previous tenant died. We had a small service for her in the lobby. Very quiet. She had no family nearby. Nara looked at her. The older woman said Unit 403 has been locked since then. The management company has been renovating it slowly, but no one lives there. Nara went back upstairs. She walked to her own door and stopped. The light was visible under the door of Unit 403, as always. She went to the building manager's office the next morning. He confirmed it without hesitation. Unit 403, empty since early 2022. A woman had lived there for 11 years. She had died in January of that year. Natural causes, he said. He looked slightly uncomfortable saying it, the way people look when they mean something slightly different than natural causes, but prefer not to elaborate. He opened the file without being asked. He slid the resident registration photograph across the desk. Nara looked at it. She had expected something like what she saw, had been preparing herself for it on the walk down to the office. But seeing it was still different from expecting it. The woman in the photograph was the woman from the hallway. The wide smile was visible even in the registration photo, an official document not known for capturing people at their most expressive. The specific quality of the smile was exactly the same. Nara handed the file back. She went upstairs. She stood in the hallway outside her apartment. Unit 403 was directly across. The door was closed. No light visible under it in the daytime, but she had seen the light at night. She had seen it every night she had been in this building. She stood and looked at the door for a long time. From inside came a sound, very soft, something between humming and singing, a tuneless melody, the kind of sound someone makes when they are comfortable and alone and doing something ordinary in their own home. Nara recognized it. She had been humming it herself since she moved in, under her breath while she unpacked, while she made coffee, while she sat at her desk. A melody she could not name, could not remember hearing before. She had thought it was something she had invented, The sound inside Unit 403 continued. Nara stood in the hallway and listened. The melody was exactly the same. Story 16. The voice on the baby monitor. Yuna and Hyunwoo set up the baby monitor 6 weeks before their daughter was born. It was a name brand device with a camera and audio, the kind that lets you watch from your phone. They placed it in the corner of the nursery, pointing at the crib, and tested it twice. And Yuna added the app to her phone and checked it once or twice a day, out of a mixture of habit and anticipation. After the baby arrived, the monitor became part of the rhythm of their nights. Their daughter slept well. The monitor mostly showed a motionless crib and the faint ambient sound of a sleeping infant. Hyunwoo said it was lucky. Yuna said she was waiting for the luck to run out. 3 months in, it ran out. She woke at 2:40 a.m. to static on the baby monitor. Not the normal faint background static, but a heavier interference. The kind that meant something was disrupting the signal. She picked up her phone. The video feed was grainy, but the crib was visible. The baby was asleep. She put the phone down. The static continued. Then, through the static, a voice. A woman's voice, speaking in Korean. Calm, low, the tone of someone reading rather than speaking. She held the phone up to her ear and listened. She could make out words, but not meaning at first. It sounded like a list. Names, perhaps, read in sequence. She nudged Hyunwoo. He listened. He said it was probably radio interference. Happens sometimes with these devices. He said it would stop. He turned over. The voice continued for 11 minutes. Yuna recorded it on her phone. In the morning, she played it back. The recording was clear enough to make out the voice. A woman, middle-aged from the sound of it, speaking in standard Korean without regional inflection. She was reading names, not rushing through them. Each name given its own moment, a slight pause between them, the way a teacher reads a class register. Yuna listened to the whole recording, 4 minutes of it. The rest lost to static. Near the end of the recording, she heard a name she recognized. Her daughter's. They had chosen it 2 weeks before the birth. They had told no one. It was a private decision. They had not posted it online. They had not told their families. The name was written in a notebook that Yuna kept in the drawer of the bedside table on her side of the bed. The voice said the name clearly, then moved on to the next name. Yuna sat with the recording playing on her phone and thought about all the ways this could be explained. Radio interference picking up another broadcast. A neighbor's monitor bleeding signal onto their frequency. A technical malfunction producing auditory patterns that only sounded like words. None of these explanations accounted for the name. She opened the bedside drawer. The notebook was there. She opened it to the page where she had written the name. The name was there, in her handwriting. Below it, in different handwriting, not hers, not Hyunwoo's, in pencil. I know. She looked at it for a long time. She closed the notebook and put it back in the drawer. She went to the nursery and stood in the doorway and looked at the monitor in the corner and listened to the silence. She moved the crib into their bedroom that night. The nursery stayed empty. She left the monitor in there. She told herself she was being sensible, keeping the baby close. Nothing wrong with keeping the baby close. On the third night, the monitor turned on by itself. It was 3 a.m. She was awake anyway. She saw the green power light on the monitor through the nursery door, which she had left open. She picked up her phone and opened the app. The video feed showed the empty nursery. The crib was gone. In their room, the monitor sat in the corner. The room was still. The voice started. The same voice as before. The same measured pace. The same list of names. She listened with her phone pressed against her ear and her daughter asleep in the crib beside her. The list went on for longer this time. More names. More pauses. She heard her daughter's name again in the middle of the list. She waited. Then she heard her own name at the end of the list, spoken with the same care as all the others. The nursery door swung open from inside. She watched it on the phone screen. The door H. Story 17. The Lake That Remembers. Tae-yang drove up to the family vacation house on a Friday afternoon in late September. The house had been in the family for 30 years, a small wooden structure in the mountains outside Chuncheon, and he had not been there since he was 11. His parents had stopped using it after a summer he only half remembered. He had not thought to ask why until now. He was 33 now. His father had recently been diagnosed with something serious, and the family was in one of those periods of reckoning that illness produces. Tae-yang had taken time off work. He was not sure what he was doing at the old house, except that being there felt like the right thing. The house was smaller than he remembered. The forest around it was larger. He unlocked the door and opened the windows and let the cold air move through. And then he went around back to the lake. It was still there. Of course it was still there. He had not thought it would be otherwise. But there was something about seeing it, the dark water between the pines, the absolute stillness of it, that made him understand why he had not come back sooner. He sat at the edge on a flat rock and looked at the water. The surface was motionless. He could see the sky reflected in it, gray September clouds, perfectly still. He could see his own reflection. He looked at it for a moment. His reflection looked back. Then it smiled. He had not smiled. He was sitting with the particular expression of a person thinking about things that don't resolve easily. He was not smiling. His reflection was. He stood up quickly. He stepped back from the edge. The flat rock was behind him now. He was standing on the bank on dry ground, 6 feet from the water's edge. His reflection was still at the surface. He could see it clearly. The outline of a man standing at the edge of the water, looking up at him. The right shape, the right height, the right clothing, but standing where he had been, not where he was, and smiling. He went inside and locked the back door and stood in the kitchen for a while. His heart was doing something he did not like. He filled a glass of water from the tap and drank it standing up. From the kitchen window, he could see the lake through the trees. His reflection was still there, still at the surface, still standing where he had been, still facing the house. He watched it from the window for a long time. It did not move. It simply stood at the surface of the lake and looked at the house with a small, fixed expression that might have been a smile, or might have been something for which he did not have a better word. He called his father. He was not sure what he intended to say. He started by asking about the house, whether anything had happened there, why they had stopped coming. His father was quiet. He said, "I should have told you before you went." Tae-yang waited. His father said your grandfather stopped going when you were very young. He said the lake had found him. His father had said the same thing. Every firstborn son in the family who goes to that lake. He said it as if this were information he had been keeping in a particular drawer for a particular moment. Tae-yang asked what it meant. His father said he wasn't sure. His grandfather had not explained it fully. He had said only that once the lake found you, you needed to stay away from still water. All of it. Mirrors, too. Anything that showed a reflection. He said, "Don't go near the water again." Tae-yang said, "It's already found me." His father was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I know. I could tell when you answered the phone." Tae-yang stood in the kitchen and looked at the window. He could not see the lake from this angle. He moved to the side of the window, angling for a better view through the trees. The surface of the lake was empty. His reflection was gone. He exhaled. Then he went through the rest of the house. Front room, bedroom, bathroom. He checked each window. He was not sure what he was checking for, but he needed to see each room. He needed to know where it was. He went into the bathroom. He turned on the light. The mirror above the sink showed the bathroom behind him. The white tiles, the shelf with soap, the towel rack, the door. He looked at his own face. It smiled. He looked over his shoulder. The bathroom was empty. He was alone. He looked back at the mirror. His reflection smiled with the same small, still expression the lake had worn. He reached forward and turned the mirror to face the wall. He packed his bag. He drove back to Seoul without stopping. He covered every mirror in his apartment with sheets of newspaper taped to the frames. He has not removed them. Story 18. The road that ends. Erin drove the mountain road between her parents' house and Seoul a dozen times a year. Holidays, birthdays, the occasional weekend visit when her mother called and sounded lonely, and Erin could not think of a good reason not to go. The route was 40 minutes from their front door to the highway, then another hour and 20 on the freeway. She knew every bend of it. She left their house at midnight. She stayed later than she intended. They had eaten dinner and watched a program, and her father had fallen asleep in his chair, and her mother had put on the news. And they had sat together without talking much, which was a kind of closeness that required no commentary. By the time she said her goodbyes and hugged her mother at the door, it was 11:45. She was not tired. She never had trouble on this drive. She had a thermos of the tea her mother always made for her when she visited, and the radio, and the window cracked slightly for cold air. The first 30 minutes were normal. She followed the road out of the village, up through the first section of mountain, past the point where the trees closed in on both sides and the road narrowed to 2 lanes with no shoulder. She knew this section. She had driven it in rain and fog and early winter darkness. She knew where to slow down and where to keep pace. At the 40-minute mark, she had not reached the highway. She checked the dashboard clock. 12:42. She should have been at the freeway entrance by 12:35 at the latest. She kept driving. At 100 a.m., she was still on the mountain. She pulled up. The road was too narrow to stop safely, but she found a slight widening near a concrete barrier and put on the hazards and looked at her GPS. The signal was weak. The map loaded slowly. When it resolved, it showed her location as a point on a road that had no name and no markings. Not the highway entrance, not any road she recognized. The surrounding topography looked like where she was, mountains, the right shape of valley. But the road itself did not appear on the map as a road. It appeared as blank space. She called her mother. It was late, but her mother answered quickly, the way parents answer calls at 1 a.m., braced. Erin said she might have made a wrong turn. She described what she was seeing. Her mother said, "You left an hour ago. You should have been on the highway already." Erin said she knew. She turned around on the narrow road, a careful 3-point turn with the mountain falling away on one side, and drove back the way she had come. She drove for 20 minutes. A road sign appeared in her headlights. She slowed. It was the sign for her parents' village, the same sign she had passed leaving them, the one at the edge of town, familiar as a piece of furniture. Population number, altitude, the small provincial emblem in the corner. She sat in the car with the engine running and looked at the sign. She had been driving away from the Ville. She called her mother again. Her mother picked up on the first ring. She sounded frightened now in a way she had not before. She said, "We've been trying to call you." Erin looked at her phone. No missed calls. Full signal. Her mother said, "Erin, someone called us an hour ago." "From your number." Erin said nothing. Her mother said they didn't speak. "We could hear breathing. We called back and you didn't answer. We called 4 more times. Nothing." Erin said, "I have been driving this mountain road since midnight. I have not been able to leave." Her mother was quiet. Erin looked at the dashboard clock. It read 4:17 a.m. She had left at midnight. She had been driving, she believed, for perhaps an hour and a half. She had checked the clock at 1 a.m. She had not checked it again until now. She had lost 4 hours on a 40-minute mountain road with no traffic and no stops. She asked her mother about the call from her number. Her mother said the person who called. "They said you were still here. They said you were upstairs in your old room, asleep. I went and checked. Your room was empty." Erin looked out the windshield at the dark road. She was parked just inside the village. If she drove forward, she would reach her parents' street in 4 minutes. She looked in the rearview mirror. The road behind her was dark, the mountain on both sides. In the mirror, very far back on the road, a pair of headlights was visible, moving toward her, slowly. She had passed no other cars in 4 hours. She sat with her hands on the wheel and watched the headlights in the mirror and did not move. They kept coming.